Get out, we don't need you here. My daughter-in-law shouted and everyone applauded. My own son remained silent as I gathered my things in shame. I left with tears in my eyes, but that night I revealed the secret that had silenced them all. If you've made it this far, you probably recognize that families aren't always what we imagine right here on this channel. You'll find a safe space where real stories like mine are told without judgment. These stories will move you, make you reflect, and perhaps even help you better understand your own family experiences. Subscribe to the channel and be part of this community where every story matters and where you're always welcome. Now I'll tell you all the details of this experience that changed my life forever. My name is Mariana. I'm 67 years old, and I never imagined my own family would hurt me so deeply. Throughout my life, I've worked tirelessly to provide the best for my 3 children. I was widowed very young when my husband, Carlos, suffered a massive heart attack at age 42. At the time, our youngest, David, was only 7 years old, and my other children, Rebecca and Jonathan, were Sheress, respectively. Suddenly, I found myself alone with 3 children to raise and no help. My parents had already passed away, and my in-laws lived in another state, facing their own financial difficulties. I had no choice but to roll up my sleeves and move forward, working twice as hard to ensure my children had a decent life. I worked as a teacher during the day and baked cakes and pastries for parties on the weekends. I slept only 4 or 5 hours a night, but I always found the energy to help the boys with their homework and be present for all the important moments. I saved every penny so they could attend decent schools and have access to extracurricular activities. I vividly remember the nights when, after everyone was asleep, I would sit at the kitchen table counting coins and doing math, often crying, silently wondering if I would be able to pay all the bills at the end of the month. But I never showed my despair in front of them. To my children, I was the unshakable fortress who solved every problem with a smile on my face. The years passed, and I proudly watched my oldest children graduate from university and move on with their lives. Rebecca became a doctor and moved to Portugal, where she completed a residency at a renowned hospital. Jonathan graduated in engineering and went to work for a large company in the south of the country. Both built solid families and are successful in their careers. As for David, well, David was always my constant worry. Intelligent, but emotionally unstable. He started and dropped out of 3 different colleges. He never stayed at a job for more than a few months, always coming up with a new excuse. His boss was picky, the environment was toxic. The pay wasn't worth the effort. At 30, he still lived with me and depended on my financial support for almost everything. It was then that David met Jessica. I vividly remember the day he brought her home for dinner. She was a beautiful young woman without a doubt. Tall, with long blonde hair and piercing green eyes. She spoke with a confidence bordering on arrogance, and I noticed how my son stared at her completely. Enchanted, almost mesmerized. Jessica worked in the marketing department of a multinational company, was 28 years old, and according to David, was revolutionizing the industry with her innovative ideas. During dinner, she spoke extensively about her promising career, her international travels, and her ambitious plans for the future. When I asked about her family, she briefly replied that her parents were separated, that she didn't have much contact with her father, and that her mother lived in another city. Something about her made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't quite pinpoint what. Maybe it was the way she barely looked me in the eye, or how she seemed to critically assess every object in my house, or even how she monopolized the conversation, barely allowing David to speak. After she left, my son asked me, his eyes bright with anticipation, "So, Mom, what did you think of her?" I hesitated for a moment. As a mother, my instincts told me to be cautious, but seeing the happiness on my son's face, I didn't have the courage to voice my reservations. "She seems very determined and focused," I replied diplomatically. David smiled, interpreting my words as approval. "Isn't she amazing, Mom? She's exactly what I need in my life. Someone who inspires me to be better, to grow." That night, as I got ready for bed, a nagging feeling lingered. It was like a premonition, a silent warning that I chose to ignore for the sake of my son. David and Jessica's relationship progressed at an alarming pace. Within just 2 months, they were already talking about marriage. David, who had always been indecisive in every aspect of life, suddenly seemed absolutely certain about wanting to spend the rest of his life with Jessica. I tried to advise him to wait a little longer to get to know her better before taking such a big step, but he interpreted my concern as interference. Mom, for the first time in my life, I know exactly what I want. Why can't you just be happy for me? It was the first of many times. I felt a growing distance between us, as if Jessica were subtly driving a wedge into our relationship. The wedding took place just 4 months after they met. It was a small but expensive ceremony, largely financed by me. Jessica insisted on an exquisite buffet, imported flowers, and a dress by a famous designer. When I gently questioned whether it wouldn't be more prudent to do something more modest and save the money for a down payment on a house, for example, she looked at me as if I'd said something absurd. Mariana, this is the most important day of my life. I'm not going to compromise the quality of my ceremony for money. David, of course, supported the bride. Mom, Jessica deserves to have the wedding of her dreams. We'll worry about the house later. I swallowed my advice and wrote a check for 35,000 reais to cover the party expenses. After their wedding, David and Jessica rented an apartment in one of the city's most expensive neighborhoods. It was a spacious 3-bedroom property in a gated community with a pool gym and 2 4-hour security. The rent was 4,500 reals, excluding condo fees and utilities. When I first visited the place, I was impressed by its beauty and comfort, but also worried. Son, are you sure you can afford a place like this? I asked discreetly as Jessica proudly showed off the gourmet kitchen to a friend who was accompanying us. David smiled confidently. Don't worry, Mom. Jessica just got promoted and I landed an interview for a great position at a tech company. We'll make it. But they didn't. 3 weeks after the move, I got a call from David. His voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. Mom, I have a problem. Jessica lost her job. The company went through a restructuring and several departments were downsized, including hers. My chest tightened. What about the interview you mentioned for the position at the tech company? If it didn't work out, he admitted, defeat evident in his voice. They chose someone with more experience. There was a long pause before he finally got to the point. Mom, I hate to ask this, but could you help us with the rent this month? I promise it will be just this once. Jessica is already sending out resumes, and I'm sure she'll find something. Soon, at that time I had just retired and was living on a modest pension. I had some savings, the result of years of hard work and careful planning to ensure a comfortable old age. But how could I deny my own son help in his time of need? Of course I can help, son, I replied without hesitation. How much do you need? The silence on the other end of the line was revealing. About $7,000 would cover rent, condo fees, and some basic bills. He finally replied, his voice barely above a whisper, as if embarrassed by the amount. It was a significant sum for me, more than 2 months' worth of my pension. But I transferred the money that same day. Just this once became every month for the next 3 years. Jessica never got a steady job again. There was always an excuse. The market was tough. Companies didn't value her potential. The salaries offered were insufficient for someone with her qualifications. David found a few temporary jobs, but nothing that paid enough to maintain the lifestyle Jessica demanded. And it was always me they turned to when the money ran out. Little by little, I saw my savings draining away. The money I'd saved through decades of hard work, which was supposed to guarantee my comfort in old age, was being used to pay rent on a luxurious apartment, where I was rarely invited to finance designer, clothes for Jessica, and to cover expenses for expensive restaurants and weekend getaways. Things reached a new level when Jessica announced she was pregnant. I was genuinely happy with the news despite the worrying financial circumstances. It would be my first grandchild, as my other children were still childless. The idea of having a baby in the family again filled me with a joy I hadn't felt in a long time. But I soon realized that the pregnancy would be used as just another excuse for ever-increasing financial demands. Jessica insisted she needed the best maternity clothes, the most expensive supplements, the most comprehensive exams. And then came the renovation of the nursery. Mom, we need to completely renovate the guest room to turn it into the baby's room, David explained over the phone one day. Jessica wants something special with custom furniture, imported wallpaper, an ergonomic nursing chair. He continued listing items that added up to an astronomical amount. And how much will that cost, David? I asked, already anticipating the answer. The total budget was 22,000 reais, he replied quickly, adding, "But it's an investment, Mom. After all, it's your grandson's room." That grandson of yours was like a well-aimed arrow to my maternal heart. It was a clear but effective manipulation. How could I say no? How could I appear like the stingy grandmother who refuses to contribute to her own grandson's comfort? So once again, I transferred the requested money. To do so, I had to sell a small plot of land I had bought years ago as an investment for my retirement. It was the last valuable asset I owned besides my apartment. Harry was born in an expensive maternity ward, complete with a luxurious suite and a private medical team, all paid for by me, of course. When I held him in my arms for the first time, I felt an immense and immediate love. His little blue eyes, identical to my late husband's, brought tears of emotion to my eyes. At that moment, I swore to myself that I would do everything to protect that child, to be present in his life, and to ensure he grew up in a loving and stable environment. Little did I know that this promise would cost me much more than I imagined. After Harry was born, I began visiting David and Jessica almost daily. Jessica had decided not to return to work, claiming that no nanny would be good enough to care for her son. David continued to work temporary jobs, earning barely enough to cover even basic expenses. My financial contribution, which had previously been monthly, became weekly. Furthermore, when I visited them, I always brought prepared meals, diapers, baby toiletries, and anything else I noticed was missing. It wasn't uncommon to arrive at the apartment to find it in complete disarray, with piles of dirty clothes, dishes piled up in the sink, and Jessica lying on the couch watching TV while Harry cried in his crib. "I'm glad you're here, Mariana," she said, never taking her eyes off the screen. "Harry is impossible today. He wouldn't let me rest for a minute. Invariably, I would pick up my grandson, change his diaper, prepare his bottle, and rock him until he finally fell asleep. Then silently, I would tidy the kitchen, load the washing machine, and vacuum the living room. Jessica rarely thanked me or even acknowledged my efforts. Instead, she often made critical comments about my care. "That's not how you hold him, Mariana. You'll end up hurting his neck." Or, "That bottle is too hot. Do you want to burn my son's mouth?" At first, I swallowed these unfair criticisms, telling myself it was natural for a new mother to be protective and anxious. But as the months passed, it became clear that Jessica simply enjoyed belittling me, making me feel incompetent. Even when I was literally doing all the work she refused to do. David, when he was home, watched these interactions without intervening. Sometimes I caught a flicker of discomfort in his eyes, but he never defended me, never confronted Jessica. As Harry grew, our bond strengthened. He would run into my arms as soon as he saw me, his little face lighting up with a smile that melted my heart. By the time he was a year old, he was already calling me Grandma and eagerly awaiting my visits. I began taking him for walks in the park, for ice cream, and to play on playgrounds. These moments alone with my grandson were precious little oases of pure joy amidst the constant tension that characterized my relationship with Jessica. It was during one of these outings, when Harry was about a year and a half old, that I realized something wasn't right. We were at the park, and he was playing excitedly on the slide. A mother with a girl the same age approached, and the children began interacting as little ones do, with smiles and babbling. The woman struck up a conversation with me, and soon we were discussing the challenges and joys of raising a child. At one point, she casually asked if I had noticed any delays in Harry's speech development. "My daughter can already form short sentences," she explained. "But I've noticed that your grandson seems to use only isolated words. Have you seen a speech therapist?" That innocent question set off alarm bells in my head. It was true that Harry, at 18 months old, still couldn't form simple sentences like "I want water" or "more cake." His vocabulary was limited to a few basic words: Grandma, Daddy, Mommy, no, yes. On the next visit to David and Jessica's apartment, I delicately mentioned the possibility of seeing a specialist, just to make sure. Everything was okay with Harry's development. Jessica's reaction was explosive. "Are you implying there's something wrong with my son? That? I'm a negligent mother who wouldn't notice if my own son had a problem." I tried to explain that there was nothing wrong with seeking a professional evaluation, that it was just a precaution, but she wouldn't listen. "You always do that, Mariana. You always try to make me feel incompetent as a mother." "Well, guess what? Harry is perfectly fine. You don't need your alarmist theories." I decided not to pursue the matter further, but I began observing Harry more closely. I noticed other subtle signs that concerned me. He seemed to have difficulty maintaining eye contact for more than a few seconds, became extremely upset by loud noises, and sometimes flapped his hands repeatedly when agitated. I researched child development and pediatric consultations online and discovered that these could be signs of conditions like autism spectrum disorder. I'm not a doctor and didn't want to make a hasty diagnosis, but my instincts told me something needed to be investigated. I decided to approach David when he was alone, hoping he would be more receptive to the idea of an assessment. The opportunity arose when I met him coming home from work one day, while Jessica had gone shopping with a friend. "Son, I need to talk to you about Harry." I began, choosing my words carefully. "I've noticed some things that concern me a bit." I explained my observations, emphasizing that I wasn't trying to alarm anyone, just ensure Harry received any support he might need. To my surprise, David listened attentively without Jessica's defensive reaction. "I've noticed some of those things too, Mom," he admitted, lowering his voice as if afraid to be overheard. "But whenever I try to talk to Jessica about it, she gets furious. She says I'm looking for problems where there aren't any, that I'm being influenced by." That confession broke my heart. My son was clearly worried about his own son, but he felt powerless to act due to Jessica's emotional control. "David," I said, holding his hands, "Harry is what matters here. If there's anything we can do to help him, we need to act now while he's still young, and early intervention can make all the difference." David nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I know, Mom. I'll schedule an appointment with a specialist. But please don't mention this to Jessica yet. Let me find the right time to tell her." The appointment was scheduled in secret. David made up an excuse to take Harry to the doctor without Jessica saying he was taking him to the amusement park. I accompanied them to the clinic, my heart heavy with worry and hope. The doctor, an experienced pediatric neurologist, examined Harry thoroughly and asked several questions about his development and behavior. At the end of the appointment, he confirmed our suspicions. Harry showed signs consistent with mild to moderate ASD, autism spectrum disorder. He recommended a series of more specific assessments and, most importantly, the immediate initiation of specialized therapies: speech therapy, occupational therapy, and behavioral intervention. We left the appointment with mixed emotions. There was the natural sadness at a diagnosis we knew would change everyone's lives, but there was also relief at finally having a clear direction, a path forward to help Harry. David was visibly shaken but determined. "I'll tell Jessica today," he decided. "She needs to understand the importance of the therapies the doctor recommended." I offered to be there when he broke the news, anticipating Jessica wouldn't react well, but he declined. "It's better if it's just between the two of us, Mom. She already thinks you're trying to control everything." That night, I waited anxiously for news. When my phone finally rang around 10 p.m., it was to hear David's broken voice. "She didn't accept it, Mom. She said it's all just doctors making it up to make money, that Harry is just a child who develops at his own pace." There was a long pause before he continued. "She tore up the medical report in front of me and forbade me from taking Harry to any specialist again." I felt a wave of anger rise inside me. How could Jessica be so selfish as to deny her own son the help he needed? "David," I said, trying to remain calm, "you can't ignore this. Harry needs these therapies. The sooner we start, the better the results will be." "I know, Mom," he replied, his voice breaking into a choked sob. "But I don't know what to do. Jessica threatened to leave me if I persist. She said she'll take Harry away and I'll never see my son again." The fear in his voice was palpable, and I understood his dilemma. Jessica had created a relationship based on control and manipulation, and David was trapped in an emotional trap he couldn't escape. "Son," he said softly, "I'm here for you and Harry. We'll find a solution together." In the days that followed, we devised a plan. David agreed to take Harry to therapy sessions without Jessica's knowledge, making excuses to leave with his son. I would pay for all the treatments, which weren't covered by insurance and cost a small fortune. To raise the money, I decided to sell my apartment and move to a smaller place. It was a huge sacrifice leaving the home I'd lived in for over 30 years, where I'd raised my children and cherished so many precious memories. But Harry was worth every penny, every memory. For 6 months, we maintained this clandestine therapy routine. The results began to show. Harry was forming short sentences, maintaining eye contact for longer periods, and demonstrating fewer repetitive behaviors. Every little bit of progress filled my heart with joy and confirmed that we were on the right track. David also seemed more confident, slowly beginning to question other aspects of Jessica's control over him and their son. It was as if by acting for Harry's benefit against Jessica's wishes, he was rediscovering his own voice, his own strength. But our secret arrangement couldn't last forever. One day, Jessica found a receipt for one of David's occupational therapy sessions in his pants pocket. When I arrived for my usual visit, I found a scene of chaos. Jessica was screaming uncontrollably, accusing David and me of conspiring behind her back, of trying to label her son as disabled, of wanting to prove she was an unfit mother. She threw objects around the apartment, breaking vases and picture frames. Harry, frightened by his mother's outburst, was huddled in a corner, his little hands covering his ears, rocking back and forth in a rhythmic movement that had become his defense mechanism against stressful situations. Seeing my grandson in such a state of anguish awakened something within me, a courage and determination I didn't know I possessed. "Enough," I shouted with an authority that silenced Jessica instantly. "Look at your son. Look at what your selfishness and denial are doing to him." I walked over to Harry, bent down to his level, and hugged him gently, whispering comforting words in his ear. He clung to me like a drowning man to a life raft. "Harry has autism." I continued, looking Jessica directly in the eye. "This isn't a sentence, it's not a label, it's not a tragedy. It's simply the way his brain works. And he needs support to develop his full potential." For a brief moment, I saw something like uncertainty cross Jessica's face, a flash of vulnerability I'd never seen before. But then her expression hardened again. "You too," she said, pointing at David and me, "have until tomorrow to decide whose side you're on. Either you stop these ridiculous therapies and never mention this absurd diagnosis again, or you can forget Harry and I ever existed." With that, she took her son from my arms, ignoring his protests, and locked herself in the room with him. David and I looked at each other, shocked by the ultimatum. "Son," I said, holding his trembling hands, "I know you love Jessica and that you're afraid of losing her. But Harry needs you now more than ever. He needs a father who will defend him, who will fight for him, who will make sure he gets all the support he needs." Tears streamed down my son's face. "I know, Mom," he whispered. "I just need time to talk to her, to make her understand." I left the apartment with a heavy heart, uncertain of what would happen next. That night, I prayed as I hadn't in years, asking for strength and guidance for all of us, especially for my little Harry innocent amidst all this turmoil. The next morning, I received a text from David. "Jessica has agreed to give therapy a try, but on one condition: you can no longer participate. She says your influence is toxic and she wants to stay away." Those words were like a stab in the back. Being separated from my grandson, especially at such a crucial moment, was almost physically painful. But I swallowed my tears and responded with dignity. "The important thing is that Harry gets the help he needs. Tell Jessica I accept his condition." And so began my exile. From almost daily visits, I began to see my grandson only occasionally, always under the strict supervision of Jessica, who timed every minute and interrupted any meaningful conversation. Harry missed me. It was obvious. He cried when I left, clung to my neck, called for me on the days I didn't show up. Each goodbye was a small mourning, a wound that reopened. David called regularly, updating me on Harry's progress with the therapies, which I continued to fund anonymously. According to him, Jessica had changed her stance on the diagnosis after seeing the positive results of the interventions. She had even joined a support group for parents of children with ASD and seemed genuinely interested in learning more about how to help her son. This gave me hope that in time she might reconsider her decision to keep me at a distance. About 6 months after this arrangement began, David called me, his voice brimming with excitement. "Mom, Jessica is throwing a surprise birthday party for Harry. He'll be 3 next Saturday, and she's planning something special. And the best part, she said she wants you to come, that Harry misses you." My heart leaped with joy. It was the first sign of a possible reconciliation, of an opening to rebuild bridges I feared were permanently burned. "Of course I'll come, son," I replied, unable to hold back tears of happiness. "Tell Jessica I really appreciate the invitation. I spent the entire week searching for the perfect gift for Harry. I opted for a sensory kit specially designed for children with autism, with different textures, lights and sounds that would help him develop. It was expensive, but I'd saved for months specifically so I could give it to him on special occasions. I also ordered a cake featuring his favorite cartoon character, prepared a basket with treats. I knew he'd love, respecting his sensory sensitivities, and bought colorful balloons to decorate. On the Saturday of their birthday, I dressed up, applied perfume, and took a taxi to their apartment laden with bags of gifts and decorations. My heart felt light for the first time in months, anticipating the joy of seeing Harry's smile when he saw me, of being able to hug him and celebrate his special day. When the taxi pulled up in front of the building, I noticed several cars parked and people getting in with gift packages. The party must have been starting. I paid the driver, grabbed my bags, and walked to the building's entrance, where the doorman knew me well from my frequent visits in the past. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Mariana," he greeted me with a smile. "Are you here for little Harry's party?" "Yes, Fernando," I replied, returning the smile. "He's turning 3 today." The doorman hesitated, his smile faltering. "That's strange," he said, scratching his head. "Mrs. Jessica gave me a list of guests for the party, and I don't remember seeing your name on it." A sick feeling began to form in my stomach. "It must be a mistake," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "My son David told me I was invited. I am Harry's grandmother, after all." Fernando looked uncomfortable, torn between following his instructions and disappointing a woman who was clearly excited about her grandson's birthday party. "Look, Mrs. Mariana, I'll call the apartment and confirm." "Okay," I nodded, grateful for his kindness. He picked up the intercom and dialed David's apartment number. After a few rings, someone answered. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I saw Fernando's face change, his expression becoming increasingly embarrassed. When he hung up, he couldn't look me in the eye. "Mrs. Mariana, I'm so sorry, but ... Mrs. Jessica said there's been a misunderstanding. She says you weren't invited to the party." I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. The doorman, seeing my devastated expression, hurried to add, "But she said I can let you go upstairs just to deliver the gift to the boy if you want." It was a crumb of consolation, an additional humiliation disguised as a concession. I swallowed the lump in my throat and, with as much dignity as I could muster, replied, "No, Fernando, thank you. If I'm not welcome at the party, I don't want to impose my presence. Just ... Just deliver this to my son, please." I handed him the sensory kit, carefully wrapped, along with a card I'd written with all my love. I kept the other bags with me, the cake, the treats, the balloons. All of these I would take back home. Heartbroken, I returned to the street, looking for a taxi to take me back to my small apartment, where I would spend my only grandchild's birthday alone. As I waited on the sidewalk, I saw a familiar car pull up. It was Jessica's mother, Jennifer. She got out accompanied by an older man, probably her current husband, both carrying enormous gifts wrapped in colorful paper. I tried to hide, not wanting them to see me in that vulnerable state, but it was too late. Jennifer noticed me and whispered something in her husband's ear, who laughed. They passed me without a greeting, as if I were invisible, and entered the building. Just then my phone rang. It was David. "Mom, where are you? We're waiting for you." His voice sounded genuinely confused. David, I replied, trying to control the tremor in my voice. I just got turned away at the door. Jessica told the doorman I wasn't invited. There was silence on the other end, followed by a heavy sigh. Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. There must have been some misunderstanding. Let me talk to Jessica and sort this out. No, son, I interrupted, tired of excuses and evasions. There was no misunderstanding. Jessica never invited me. You either made it up or she lied to you. Either way, I'm not going to stand here on the sidewalk begging. To be part of my own grandson's birthday party while her mother and her husband are welcomed with open arms. David started to protest, promising to come down immediately to talk to Jessica to fix the situation. But I had already made up my mind. Never mind, David, just tell Harry that Grandma loves him very much and that his gift is with the doorman. Have a good day. I hung up before he could respond, before my tears began to fall uncontrollably. A taxi finally appeared, and I quickly got in, giving the driver my address. On the way home, I cried silently, feeling betrayed, humiliated, and above all, worried for Harry. How would he react when he realized that his grandmother, who had always been there for every important moment of his life, was absent on his birthday? When I got home, I put the cake in the fridge, put away the treats, and popped the balloons one by one. Each burst a small scream of frustration and pain. Then I sat in the living room chair and stared into space, lost in dark thoughts. The phone rang several times. It was David, presumably trying to explain himself, but I didn't answer. I needed this time alone to process what had happened and, more importantly, to decide what to do next. Because I had realized one thing with crystal clarity: things couldn't go on as they were. I had sacrificed everything, my home, my savings, my dignity, for a son who allowed his wife to treat me like an unwanted intruder, like a walking wallet to be exploited and discarded when I was no longer useful. And worst of all, this situation was affecting Harry, who certainly felt the tension and hostility, who was deprived of the presence of a grandmother who loved him deeply, who was being used as a pawn in a cruel game of manipulation and control. That night, I made a decision that would change the course of our lives forever. I called a lawyer a friend had recommended, briefly explained my situation, and scheduled an appointment for the following Monday. It was time to fight, not just for myself, but especially for Harry, if I continued to allow them to exploit me financially while excluding me emotionally. I would be perpetuating a toxic cycle that would ultimately harm everyone, especially my grandson. The consultation with Dr. Andre, the lawyer, was revealing. After listening carefully to my story, detailing all the undocumented loans, the therapies I secretly financed, the constant humiliation, he looked at me with a mixture of compassion and determination. Ms. Mariana, he said, we have a solid case here for several legal actions. First, we can file a lawsuit for the amounts you lent to your son and daughter-in-law over the years. Second, we can request legally guaranteed visitation, rights based on the emotional bond established between you and your grandson, especially considering your crucial role in the diagnosis and treatment of his ASD. And third, if you wish, we can explore the possibility of requesting joint custody given the mother's pattern of potentially harmful behavior. The thought of taking legal action against my own son caused me indescribable pain. But when I thought about Harry, his well-being, his right to have a grandmother present in his life, I knew I had no choice. I want to pursue the first two options for now, I decided. Collecting the fees and guaranteeing visitation rights. I don't want to take Harry away from his parents, just ensuring that I can remain a part of his life. Dr. Andre nodded understandingly. It's a wise decision, Mrs. Mariana. Let's start by gathering all the necessary documentation. Do you have proof of bank transfers, text messages, requesting money receipts for the therapies you're financing? Luckily, I've always been organized. Over the years, I'd meticulously saved every receipt, every message, every receipt. I took it all to Dr. Andre the following week, and he was impressed by the volume and consistency of the documentation. With this evidence, he assured me we have a very strong case. I'll prepare the initial pleadings and will file the lawsuits as soon as possible, while awaiting legal proceedings. I kept my distance from David and his family, following my lawyer's advice. It was a painful time. I missed Harry every day, worried about his well-being, wondered if he was asking about me, if he felt my absence. David tried to contact me repeatedly, leaving confusing and contradictory voicemails sometimes, apologizing for the birthday incident sometimes, accusing me of not understanding Jessica of being insensitive to the pressures she faced as a mother of a child with special needs. Each message reinforced my conviction that I was doing the right thing, however difficult it might be. 2 weeks later, Dr. Andre filed the lawsuit. 3 days later, I received an angry call from David. "How could you do this to us, Mom? Sue us, your own family." The desperation in his voice was palpable, but there was also something else: fear. Fear of losing the financial support that had become his way of life. Fear of facing the consequences of years of exploitation. "David," I replied calmly, "I'm only asking for what is rightfully mine. The money I lent you with the promise of repayment and the right to spend time with my grandson, whom I love deeply." Jessica is devastated, he continued, ignoring my arguments. She says she always tried to build a good relationship with you, that she always respected you as Harry's mother-in-law and grandmother. It was such an absurd, blatant lie that I almost laughed. "David," he said firmly, "both you and I know that's not true. Jessica tolerated me as long as I was financially useful. The moment I began to question her decisions regarding Harry, particularly his diagnosis and treatment, she shut me out. And you allowed it." There was silence on the other end of the line. When David spoke again, his voice was choked, as if on the verge of tears. "What do you want from us, Mom? Money? You can have everything we have, which isn't much. Just stop this process, please. It's destroying our family." "No, son," I replied, feeling my own heart breaking. "I don't want to destroy anything. I want to rebuild, but on solid foundations of mutual respect and consideration. I want to be able to see Harry regularly without interference or manipulation. I want the money I sacrificed for you to be recognized as a loan, not a gift to be taken for granted. And most of all, I want you, my son, to find your own voice again, your own strength. Because the man you've become, who allows your mother to be humiliated and exploited, is not the son I raised." There was no immediate response from David. Just a deep sigh, followed by the sound of a door closing. Then, to my surprise, I heard a different voice on the phone. "Mariana," it was Jessica. "What are you trying to prove with this? That you're a victim, that we're terrible people? Well, congratulations. You managed to ruin your son's marriage, traumatize your grandson, and leave us all on the brink of bankruptcy. I hope you're satisfied." Her voice was venomous, every word dripping with hatred. But for once, I didn't feel intimidated. "Jessica," I replied calmly, "I'm not trying to prove anything but the truth. And the truth is, you took my money for years, promising to return it, while treating me with increasing disrespect. The truth is, you deliberately tried to alienate me from Harry, even though you knew how close we were. The truth is, you manipulated my son, turning him into a shell of the man he could be. I'm not doing this to punish anyone, but to set boundaries that should have been set long ago." She laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Boundaries, is that what you call them? Look, Mariana, let's be honest here. You've always been meddling, always tried to control. David's life always thought you knew better than anyone about how to raise my son. Well, guess what? I don't need you. David doesn't need you. And Harry certainly doesn't need a bitter, vengeful grandmother who destroys his family out of pure selfishness." Her words were clearly meant to hurt me, to make me second-guess my actions. At another time, perhaps they would have worked. But now, after months of reflection and personal growth, I saw her attacks for what they truly were: the desperation of someone losing control. "Jessica," she said softly, "I understand that you're angry and scared. But this isn't about you or me. It's about Harry and his well-being. It's about David regaining his autonomy. And it's about establishing family relationships based on mutual respect, not financial exploitation or emotional manipulation. Respect," she practically spat the word. "You don't know anything about respect. You know what it is? A lonely, pathetic old woman who has no life of her own and needs to intrude on ours. Well, I have news for you will never see Harry again. Ever. I will personally make sure he grows up knowing exactly what kind of person you are, and with that she hung up. I stared at the silent phone, feeling a mixture of sadness and determination. Jessica's words cruel as they were only confirmed that I was on the right path. This was no longer just a matter of money or visitation rights. It was a fight for the emotional and psychological well-being of the entire family, especially Harry, who deserved to grow up in a healthy environment free from toxic manipulation. The first hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, I received worrying news from a neighbor of David and Jessica with whom I had been in occasional contact. She said things had gotten significantly worse in the apartment. There were constant arguments, shouting, and slamming doors. She had once seen David leaving the building late at night, clearly distraught, carrying a small suitcase. Jessica seemed increasingly out of control, yelling at Harry for trivial matters, neglecting his basic needs. "I'm really worried about him," the neighbor confessed. "He seems so scared, so lost." I took this information to Dr. Andre, who suggested we request an urgent psychosocial evaluation based on the allegations of possible neglect and emotional abuse. "If the situation is as serious as it appears," he explained, "we need to act quickly to protect Harry." I agreed, though my heart sank as I considered the implications. Was I truly prepared to potentially separate my grandson from his parents? But when I thought of him alone and scared, exposed to constant yelling and conflict, I knew I had no choice. The initial hearing was tense, as expected. David and Jessica appeared with their own lawyer, a young, aggressive man who had clearly been instructed to attack my character and motives. He tried to paint me as a controlling and possessive mother-in-law who gave money only to maintain power over her son, and daughter-in-law who constantly interfered in Harry's upbringing. Dr. Andre, experienced and calm, simply presented the evidence, the transfer receipts, the text messages begging for money and promising its return, the receipts for the therapies I had funded, and testimonies from professionals confirming my crucial role in Harry's diagnosis and treatment. The judge, an elderly man with discerning eyes, listened attentively to both sides. When it was my turn to speak, I told my story simply and honestly, without dramatization or excessive accusations. I spoke of my love for Harry, of how I had noticed the early signs of autism that his own parents had ignored, of how I had secretly funded his therapies when Jessica refused to accept the diagnosis. I spoke of the gradual exclusion from my life, culminating in the painful birthday episode. And I spoke of my current concerns based on the neighbors' accounts about my grandson's emotional and physical well-being. During my testimony, I watched David. He kept his gaze downcast, avoiding eye contact with either me or Jessica, who sat rigidly beside him occasionally, whispering furiously in his ear. He looked emaciated, haggard, as if carrying a huge weight on his shoulders. My heart ached for him, for the son I knew and loved, who seemed so lost and confused. Jessica, on the other hand, alternated between expressions of disdain and outbursts of theatrical indignation, especially when I mentioned her initial refusal to accept Harry's diagnosis and her behavior on his birthday. At the end of the hearing, the judge announced that he would need time to review all the evidence before making a final decision. However, based on the allegations of possible emotional neglect presented, he ordered an immediate psychosocial evaluation of the family to be conducted by court-appointed professionals. He also granted me provisional visitation rights. I could see Harry twice a week for 2 hours each visit in a neutral location such as a park or community center. As the hearing ended and we began to leave the room, David approached me, hesitantly ignoring Jessica's furious protests. "Mom," he said quietly, "can we talk alone?" I glanced at Dr. Andre, who nodded discreetly, indicating there would be no legal problem in having this conversation. "Of course, son," I replied, feeling a glimmer of hope. We found an empty bench in the courthouse hallway, out of earshot of Jessica and the lawyers. David sat beside me, running his hands through his hair in a nervous gesture I recognized from his childhood. "Mom," he began, his voice shaking, "I'm so sorry for everything." For the way we allowed you to be treated, for the money we never returned, for the lies." He paused, swallowing hard. "Especially for Harry, for trying to keep him away from you when you were the only one who truly saw what he needed." I felt tears well up in my eyes at those words, the first sincere acknowledgement of everything that had happened. I took his hands in mine, noticing how cold and trembling they were. "David, I love you. I always have and always will. You are my son, my flesh and blood. But I couldn't keep letting things stay this way. For me, for you, and most of all for Harry." He nodded, tears streaming freely down his face now. "I know, Mom, and you were right. Everything you said was true. I lost myself somewhere. I let Jessica control everything, isolate me from you, make decisions that I knew deep down weren't best for Harry." I squeezed his hands, encouraging him to continue. "Jessica and I aren't doing well," he admitted, his voice dropping even lower. "Since Harry was diagnosed, things have gotten worse. She refuses to admit any responsibility, blaming everyone but herself." "And when you filed the lawsuit?" He hesitated, looking around nervously before continuing. "She lost control. She started drinking heavily, yelling at Harry for no reason, threatening me. She said if I defended you, if I showed any loyalty to you, she would take Harry away and I would never see him again." My heart sank at this. Jessica's threats explained David's seemingly passive behavior, his silence during her attacks on me. He was quite literally being emotionally blackmailed, using his love for his son as a weapon. "David," she said softly, "this is abuse. What Jessica is doing is manipulation and emotional control. And now it's affecting not just you, but Harry as well. You see that, don't you?" He nodded slowly, as if finally allowing himself to acknowledge a truth he'd been denying for so long. "I see it, Mom. I see it now. But I'm so afraid. Afraid of losing Harry, afraid of what she might do if I confront her directly." "You're not alone in this, son," I assured him. "I'm here. And there are professionals who can help both you and Harry. But the first step is recognizing the situation for what it is and being willing to make changes, no matter how scary they seem." David took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I'm ready, Mom. I can't go on like this for myself, and especially for Harry. I will get help. I will fight for custody if necessary, and I want you to be by my side on this journey." I hugged my son, then feeling as if finally, after years of distance and pain, we were truly reconnecting. "I'll always be there for you, David. Always." When we parted, he felt lighter, as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "What do we do now?" he asked, with a determination in his voice I hadn't heard in years. "Now," I replied, "we begin to rebuild. Step by step, day by day. And the first step is making sure Harry is safe and well cared for." Our moment was interrupted by the furious arrival of Jessica, who had finally noticed David's absence. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her eyes flashing with anger. "I'm talking to my mother, Jessica," David replied with a firmness that clearly caught her off guard. "Well, finish now," she ordered. "We have to go home. Is Harry waiting, or have you forgotten your own son?" It was a transparent attempt at manipulation, at using Harry as a tool of control. But this time, David didn't give in. "Harry's at school until 3, he replied calmly. "We have time. And even if we didn't, this conversation with my mother is important." Jessica looked from David to me as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. For a moment, I saw something like fear flash in her eyes, a realization that she was losing the control she'd maintained for so long. But she quickly composed herself, forcing a fake smile. "Sure, honey, take your time. I'll be waiting in the car." With one last venomous look in my direction, she walked away, heels clicking dramatically on the marble floor of the courthouse. "She's not going to make this easy," I observed, after making sure Jessica was out of earshot. David sighed. "No, she won't. But I'm prepared for that now. And with the psychosocial evaluation ordered by the judge, we'll have a clearer picture of the situation and what's best for Harry." We talked for a few more minutes, establishing a plan for the coming days. David would seek a therapist for himself to help him deal with years of manipulation and abuse. He would also consult with a family law attorney to understand His options if he decided to seek custody of Qua. If you're a Qua, questionable ingredients, if you're using like a scanner. If you're using like a scanner app, and it's like we're gonna die like we're gonna die. Like, look with this. And we tell him, look at this. And we all know I've been exploring. Harry, as for me, I would exercise my newly granted visitation rights and be available to support both David and Harry during this turbulent time. Our first meeting under the new visiting terms took place 2 days later in a park near David's apartment. Harry ran into my arms as soon as he saw me, his little face lighting up with a smile that warmed my heart. "Grandma, you're back," he exclaimed, clinging to my neck as if afraid I might disappear again. "Yes, my love," I replied, choking back tears of joy. "Grandma's here and she's never leaving." David watched our reunion with a sad smile visibly, moved by witnessing the strong bond between grandmother and grandson. Jessica was not present. According to David, she had refused to come, saying she couldn't bear to see me. During our 2 hours together, we joked, talked, and simply enjoyed each other's company. Harry showed me his progress in therapy, forming longer, more complex sentences and maintaining eye contact for longer periods. He was clearly thriving with the proper support, which only reinforced my conviction that he was fighting for the right cause. When it was time to say goodbye, Harry was visibly anxious. "Will you come back, Grandma?" Promise. I crouched down to his level, looking directly into his beautiful blue eyes. "I promise, my love. Grandma, we'll see you again very soon. And one day we'll be able to spend much more time together." He seemed pleased with this, though he held me for a long time, before finally letting me go. In the days that followed, both David and I kept our promises. He began therapy, consulted a licensed attorney, and most importantly began establishing firm boundaries with Jessica. I exercised my visitation rights, religiously, gradually rebuilding my relationship with Harry. The court-ordered psychosocial evaluation was underway with professionals visiting the apartment, observing family interactions, and interviewing everyone involved, including Harry, in a manner tailored to his age and condition. The final evaluation report was devastating for Jessica. The professionals identified a clear pattern of manipulation and emotional control toward both David and Harry. They documented instances of emotional neglect toward the boy particularly. When it came to his specific needs related to ASD, they also noted the stark contrast between Harry's behavior during interactions with me, relaxed, happy, communicative, and with Jessica, anxious, withdrawn, often nonverbal. The recommendation was unequivocal: primary custody should be transferred to David, with Jessica entitled to supervised visitation until she completed therapy and parenting courses specific to children with special needs. When the report was presented in court, Jessica completely lost control. She yelled at the evaluators, accusing them of bias and incompetence. She yelled at David, calling him a weak and useless husband. She yelled at me, blaming me for destroying her family. The judge, observing her volatile behavior, merely upheld the report's conclusions and ordered her removed from the courtroom. When she refused to calm down after multiple warnings, the final ruling was even more scathing than the recommendation. David would receive full custody of Harry, with Jessica entitled only to supervised visits in a family living center after completing mandatory therapy. Regarding the lawsuit seeking collection of the amounts I'd lent over the years, the judge ordered David to pay me in full in monthly installments commensurate with his income. Jessica wasn't held financially responsible, as David assumed full responsibility for the debts. For me, this was never really about the money, but rather about acknowledging the abuse and exploitation I suffered. The money, however, would be welcome. It would allow me to live out my remaining years in greater comfort and security, perhaps even enabling me to move closer to David and Harry. In the months that followed, we witnessed the gradual transformation of our lives. David and Harry moved to a smaller apartment better suited to their needs and financial means. Jessica, refusing to accept the court order, moved to another city, rarely contacting them and never attending the supervised visits she was entitled to. David flourished in his role as a single father, dedicating himself entirely to Harry's well-being and development. With the support of therapists, special education specialists, and of course, a loving grandmother, Harry also thrived, making remarkable progress in all areas of development. As for me, I rediscovered the joy of being a grandmother without restrictions, without manipulation, without the constant fear of offending or displeasing. I began picking up Harry from school 3 times a week, taking him to his therapy sessions, and actively participating in his daily life. On weekends, he stayed with me, giving David some time to rest and care for himself. We were a team father and grandmother, united by unconditional love for an extraordinary child who deserved nothing less than the best. Today, for years after that painful initial hearing, I look back and see how much we've evolved as a family. Harry, now 7, is in 2nd grade at an inclusive school that offers all the necessary support for children with ASD. He has friends, participates in extracurricular activities, and is learning to play the piano. He still faces challenges related to autism, of course, but he approaches them with a confidence and resilience that fill me with pride. David has found a stable job at a company that values his dedication and competence. He's slowly repaying his debt to me, even though I often tell him not to worry about it. Most importantly, he's regained his self-esteem, his voice, and his ability to set healthy boundaries. He even recently started dating a wonderful woman, a special education teacher he met at Harry's school. Jessica remains a distant, almost mythological figure in Harry's life. He occasionally asks about her, and we answer with age-appropriate honesty, without demonizing her, but also without romanticizing her past behavior. And me, well, I've learned valuable lessons along this journey. I've learned that love doesn't mean allowing abuse or exploitation. That setting healthy boundaries isn't selfish, but self-preservation. That sometimes the hardest choice is also the most necessary. And above all, that it's never too late to start over, to rebuild, to demand respect and dignity. Life isn't perfect, it never is. We still have our challenges, our arguments, our bad days, but we face it all together as a true family based on genuine love, mutual respect, and a commitment to each other's well-being. If this story touched your heart in any way, please like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Share your own experiences or reflections in the comments. Have you ever been in a similar situation? How did you deal with it? Your words can help others going through similar difficulties, reminding them that they are not alone. Thank you for listening, and until the next story.